The unexpected proposal. The twin moons of Seltharion glowed softly in the alien sky, bathing the royal palace in a silver-blue light. Dorian Vance, a human researcher, stood on the grand balcony overlooking the vast bioluminescent gardens. He had spent over a year studying the Selthari, an enigmatic and beautiful alien race, but what started as scientific curiosity had turned into something deeper. His heart belonged to Lyra, the second princess of the Selthari royal family. Tonight was special. Tonight, everything would change. Lyra stood before him, her deep crimson eyes reflecting the starlight. The soft glow of her markings pulsed with an emotion Dorian had come to recognize as affection. She reached for his hands, her cool fingers entwining with his. "Dorian," she whispered, "our time together has proven to me that we are meant to be. I wish for you to be my mate." Dorian felt his breath hitch. He had imagined this moment, but hearing it aloud sent a rush of exhilaration through him. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I would be honored." A brilliant smile spread across Lyra's face, and the air around them shimmered as the palace attendants signaled the royal council that a proposal had been accepted. In Selthari culture, such an event was not just between two people, it was a matter of tradition and law. Lyra turned toward the open chamber doors, where her three sisters, Silen, Nyra, and Vela, stood watching. Their expressions were unreadable. The eldest, Silen, stepped forward. Unlike Lyra's warmth, Silen's gaze was sharp, calculating. "You do understand what this means, don't you, human?" Dorian frowned slightly. "Marriage?" Nyra, the second youngest, let out a short laugh, her violet hair cascading down her shoulders. "Not just marriage, Dorian. You agreed to be Lyra's mate, which means," she gestured between herself and her sisters, "you must also take us as your mates." Dorian blinked, his mind stalling. "Wait, what?" Vela, the quietest of the four, finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is our way. To marry one of us is to marry us all." His stomach flipped. He looked at Lyra for confirmation, hoping for some misunderstanding, but she only nodded, her expression somber. "It is Selthari law," Lyra explained. "Our bloodline must remain unified, and the one who bonds with a princess must bond with all sisters of the same lineage." Dorian took a step back, his pulse quickening. He had spent months falling in love with Lyra, imagining a future with her. But now, he was expected to marry three other women he barely knew. Silen's lips curled into something between amusement and disdain. "What's wrong, human? Did you think taking an alien bride would be simple?" Nyra leaned against the balcony railing, smirking. "If you're scared, you can always back out." Lyra's fingers tightened around his. "But if you leave now, Dorian, we can never be together." A heavy silence fell over the group. The weight of their gazes pressed down on him. This wasn't just about love anymore. This was about culture, duty, and an entire alien tradition he had never truly understood. Dorian looked at each of the sisters in turn. Silen, cold and unreadable. Nyra, playful but sharp. Vela, soft-spoken and distant. And finally, Lyra, the woman he loved. He had a choice to make. And something told him this was only the beginning. Bound by tradition. Dorian sat in the grand hall of the Selthari royal palace, still reeling from the night before. The idea of marrying Lyra had filled him with excitement, but now, the reality of Selthari customs weighed heavily on his mind. A union with one princess meant a union with all. Across from him, the three other sisters studied him in silence. Silen, the eldest, leaned back in her chair, her fingers interlocked as she observed him with sharp, unreadable eyes. Her presence carried the weight of authority, and there was no warmth in her gaze. Nyra, the mischievous one, toyed with a glowing crystal, spinning it between her fingers. She seemed amused by his discomfort, her lips curled into a half-smile. Vela, the youngest and quietest, sat apart from the others, her pale violet eyes focused on the garden outside. Unlike her sisters, she showed no emotion, no sign of approval or disapproval. Lyra sat beside him, her fingers brushing against his hand in silent reassurance. Finally, Cylon broke the silence. "If you are to be our mate, you must prove yourself worthy." Dorian tensed. "Prove myself? I thought the proposal was already accepted." Nyra laughed. "Oh, it was. But tradition dictates that a suitor must pass the trials before becoming the mate of a Selthari princess." Dorian frowned. "Trials?" Vela finally turned to face him, her voice as soft as a whispering wind. "3 trials. 1 for each of us. If you fail, the union cannot happen." Dorian exhaled slowly, his mind spinning. He had never expected love to come with conditions, let alone a series of tests designed by 3 women who barely knew him. Lyra squeezed his hand. "I know this seems overwhelming, but the trials are important. They will determine if you are truly ready to become part of our bond." Dorian met her gaze, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. He didn't want to lose her. He turned back to the sisters. "All right. What are the trials?" Cylon stood, her presence commanding. "Mine will be a test of strategy. You are human, unfamiliar with our ways of war and leadership. If you are to stand beside a princess, you must prove you can make difficult decisions in times of crisis." Nyra leaned forward, her smirk widening. "Mine is a test of resilience. I want to see what you're really made of, human. We Selthari are warriors, we endure, we survive. If you cannot withstand the trials of our world, you have no place among us." Vela's gaze softened slightly. "And mine is a test of heart. You must understand our pain, our fears, and our desires. A mate must not only be strong but also kind. If you do not pass my trial, then you do not truly belong with us." Dorian swallowed hard. He had expected resistance, maybe even a challenge or two, but this? "And what happens if I pass all 3, he asked. Cylon's expression remained unreadable. "Then you will be accepted, not just as Lyra's mate, but as our mate." The words sent a shiver down his spine. He wasn't just proving himself to marry them. He was proving himself to become one of them. Lyra looked at him with silent hope, but she didn't speak. This was his choice to make. Dorian took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision settle in his chest. "All right," he said, looking each sister in the eye. "I'll do it. The first trial, the test of strategy." Cylon wasted no time. Within the hour, Dorian found himself standing inside an expansive chamber filled with holographic projections of warships, planetary maps, and shifting battle formations. It was a war simulation, and he was at the center of it. Cylon paced in front of him, her expression unreadable. "This is a recreation of one of our most infamous battles, the Siege of Verokai. Our forces were outnumbered, and the enemy had us surrounded. The original commander failed, and our people suffered great losses." She turned to him, her deep red eyes sharp. "You will take his place. I want to see what kind of leader you are." Dorian's throat went dry. He wasn't a military strategist. He was a researcher. The simulation began. Holographic ships flickered to life, filling the chamber with the sounds of distant battle. A Selthari officer, an AI projection, turned to him. "Commander, enemy forces are advancing on all fronts. What are your orders?" Dorian analyzed the battlefield, his heart pounding. The Selthari fleet was outgunned and outmaneuvered. He needed to think fast. Option 1, launch a full frontal assault and risk massive casualties. Option 2, attempt a retreat, which could leave them vulnerable. Option 3, look for an alternative strategy. Dorian's mind raced. He remembered something from his studies. Selthere ships used cloaking technology, but it drained power rapidly. What if? He turned to the officer. Pull back all non-essential power and divert it to cloaking. Make it look like we're retreating. Once we're invisible, move behind enemy lines and strike their command ship. Ceylan's expression remained unreadable, but she said nothing as the AI followed his orders. The fleet powered down, flickering out of sight. The enemy advanced, believing the Selthere had abandoned the battle. And then, they struck. The Selthere forces reappeared directly behind the enemy's command ship, launching a precision attack that crippled their entire fleet. The battle was won. Dorian exhaled sharply as the simulation ended. The room was silent. Ceylan regarded him carefully, then, nodded. Not bad, she admitted. You think like a Selthere. That is unexpected. He had passed the first trial. But the real challenge was yet to come. Trials of the Selthere. Dorian had barely caught his breath after the first trial when Naira stepped forward, her violet eyes gleaming with mischief. You handled my sister's game well enough, she said, stretching lazily, but strategy means nothing if your body fails you. She motioned for him to follow, leading him down a long corridor filled with shifting lights. The deeper they walked into the palace, the more the architecture changed, from smooth, elegant structures to rugged walls covered in Selthere battle markings. Where are we going? Dorian asked. Naira grinned. To the proving grounds. You're about to experience the test of resilience. The proving grounds. The chamber they entered was massive, an arena built into the very rock of the palace's foundation. Spectators, warriors, nobles, even servants, gathered around the edges, murmuring among themselves. Dorian clenched his fists. He wasn't a fighter. He could hold his own in a scuffle, sure, but against an alien warrior race? This was a whole new level. Naira turned to him. Your task is simple. Survive. A heavy gate at the far end of the arena groaned open, and a hulking Selthere warrior stepped through. His skin was dark blue, his muscles corded with strength. His armor was decorated with marks of countless victories, and the spear in his hand hummed with energy. Dorian's stomach dropped. Meet General Vorik, Naira said, clearly enjoying his distress. He has agreed to test your limits. Vorik studied Dorian with mild amusement. A human? You insult me, princess. Dorian swallowed. This was not a fair fight. Naira crossed her arms. If you're going to be one of us, you need to endure what we endure. Show us you belong, human. Dorian's mind raced. There was no way he could win a fight against someone like Vorik. But, the test wasn't to win. It was to survive. He took a deep breath, his muscles tensing as Vorik charged. A battle of endurance. The first strike came fast, too fast. Dorian barely dodged the spear as it slashed through the air, cutting a deep groove into the arena floor. He rolled to the side, already gasping. One hit would break him. Vorik smirked. Pathetic. Dorian had no weapon, no armor. But he had his mind. He focused on movement, staying just out of reach, forcing Vorik to chase him. The Selthere general was powerful, but he was heavy, his strikes leaving small openings between attacks. Dorian counted. 1. 2. 3. Swing. Pause. 1. 2. 3. Swing. Pause. The pattern was there. As Vorik thrust forward again, Dorian twisted to the side and ducked under his arm. A roar erupted from the crowd. Naira's eyes widened slightly. Huh. Clever. The fight dragged on. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Dorian's body screamed in protest, sweat pouring down his face, muscles aching. But he refused to fall. Vorik, growing frustrated, swung with more force. Too much force. Dorian dodged again, and this time, Vorik's spear slammed into the ground, embedding itself into the stone. An opening. Dorian threw himself at the warrior, ramming his shoulder into Vorik's chest. It was like hitting a wall, but the impact was enough to make the larger man stumble. Silence filled the arena. Dorian staggered back, his vision blurry, his breaths ragged. But he was still standing. Naira smirked. That's enough. Vorik yanked his spear free, stepping back. He studied Dorian for a long moment before, grinning. You have a warrior's heart, he said. You pass. Dorian collapsed to his knees, exhausted. He had survived. He had passed the second trial. The final test, the trial of heart. The celebration was short-lived. As Dorian was helped to his feet, Vela stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. My turn. The tension in the air shifted. Unlike the others, Vela's trial wasn't about war or survival. It was something deeper. Follow me, she said. Dorian's chest tightened as he walked beside her, leaving the roar of the arena behind. He had survived the first two trials through instinct and strategy. But this one? This one felt more dangerous. The trial of heart. Dorian's legs ached from the battle, his breath still uneven, but there was no time to rest. Vela, the quietest and most enigmatic of the three sisters, led him down a long, winding corridor away from the arena. Unlike the previous trials, there were no spectators, no grand displays of stealthy strength. The air was heavy, charged with something unseen. Dorian could feel the weight of expectation pressing on his chest. Where are we going? He finally asked. Vela didn't look at him, her lavender hair shifting as she walked. To the last trial. The most important one. Unlike Naira and Kylena, who had tested his mind and body, Vela's trial wasn't something he could fight or outthink. This was a test of his heart. The Garden of Memories. They entered a vast, open chamber unlike anything Dorian had seen in the palace. A garden. Bioluminescent vines wrapped around elegant stone pillars, casting a soft glow over a shimmering lake. Floating petals drifted across the water, glowing in shades of violet and gold. Vela finally turned to face him. Sit. Dorian hesitated before lowering himself onto a smooth, stone bench. He could feel something stirring in the air, something deep and personal. Vela sat across from him, watching him closely. This trial isn't about strength or survival, she said, her voice softer than before. It's about what you carry inside you. Dorian frowned. What does that mean? She reached out, placing a hand over his chest. A warmth spread from her fingertips, and suddenly, memories flooded his mind. The weight of the past. Dorian gasped as the garden around him blurred. He saw images flashing before his eyes, his old life, his world before the Selthery. His mother's voice, soft but filled with worry. The feeling of abandonment when his father left. The first time he ever felt powerless. Pain. Fear. Regret. He clenched his fists, but the memories wouldn't stop. Then came the memories of his time with the Selthery. Kylena's fierce challenge. Naira's relentless battle. Vela's quiet strength. And beyond that, the feeling of belonging. Dorian had spent so long thinking he was alone. That no one truly needed him. But now. Vela's voice broke through the haze. You've proven your mind is strong. Your body is strong. But your heart, she trailed off, studying him. Do you know why this trial matters? Dorian shook his head, still catching his breath. Because, Vela said gently, you cannot love us with a heart that is still chained to the past. The choice. Dorian exhaled, his hands trembling. You think I can just let it go? Vela smiled sadly. No, but you can choose whether to carry it forward or leave it behind. He looked around the garden, the glowing petals reflecting in his eyes. He had spent years feeling like he was drifting, unsure of where he belonged. But here, with them, he had a place. A future. Dorian inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. He let the memories wash over him, the pain, the loneliness, the doubt, before exhaling, releasing them into the air like drifting petals. Vela studied him for a long moment. Then, she nodded. You pass. A deep warmth spread through his chest, different from before. This wasn't magic. It was peace. The sisters' decision. By the time they returned to the Great Hall, Kylena and Naira were waiting. So? Naira asked, arms crossed. Vela gave a small, knowing smile. He's ready. Kylena stepped forward, her piercing gaze locking onto Dorian. You have passed the trials of the Selthery, she said, voice rich with tradition. You have proven yourself in mind, in body, and in heart. Dorian's breath hitched. This was it. Kylena continued, but there is one last step. She glanced at her sisters. Vela nodded. Naira smirked. Dorian gulped. The three of us, Kylena said, stepping forward, have decided. You won't just take one of us as your mate. Naira leaned in, grinning. You'll take all three. Dorian's brain short-circuited. Wait. What? The bond of the Selthery. Dorian stood frozen, his mind struggling to process Kylena's words. All three of them? He had spent the past few days proving himself, outwitting Kylena in a battle of strategy, enduring Naira's brutal test of resilience, and finally, facing the deepest parts of himself in Vela's trial of the heart. He thought he was preparing to be worthy of just one of them. But now, he was claimed by all three. Naira clapped a hand on his shoulder, grinning at his stunned expression. You look like you just got hit in the head, human. Dorian blinked, his voice finally catching up. I thought I was fighting for the right to be with one of you. Kylena's lips twitched into a smirk. You were. But you proved yourself to all of us. Vela's gaze softened. And we are not like human women. Selthery mates share a single bond. If we have chosen you, we choose together. Dorian's heartbeat thundered in his chest. He had expected a single relationship to be overwhelming. But three powerful alien women, all bound to him? His brain nearly short-circuited again. The ceremony of unity. The Great Hall had transformed. Bioluminescent petals drifted down from the ceiling, glowing in hues of violet and gold. Torches lined the walls, casting soft flickering light over the grand altar in the center of the chamber. A crowd had gathered, Selthery nobles, warriors, and elders. Whispers filled the room. The first human to ever bond with the ruling family. Dorian shifted nervously at the front of the hall. His clothes were no longer torn from battle, he now wore a sleek ceremonial robe, stitched with the symbols of the Selthery royal house. It felt strange. Like he was stepping into something much larger than himself. Kylena, Naira, and Vela stood before him, each adorned in flowing, iridescent garments that shimmered under the ethereal glow of the hall. They looked breathtaking. Kylena, fierce and unwavering, was regal in deep blue, her commanding presence making the air itself feel heavier. Naira, wild and full of energy, wore crimson, the color of warriors. She smirked at him, as if daring him to back out now. Vela, quiet and mysterious, was draped in soft silver, her violet eyes filled with something deeper. An elder stepped forward, raising a staff etched with glowing symbols. The bond of the Selthari is not taken lightly, he intoned. You enter not as one, but as four, bound by honor and choice. The room fell into silence as the sisters extended their hands toward Dorian. Kylena spoke first. Do you accept the weight of this bond? To stand beside us as equals? Naira leaned in, her golden eyes flashing. To fight, to love, to live as one of us? Vela's voice was softer, but held the most meaning. And will you open your heart to us, not as a warrior, but as yourself? Dorian inhaled sharply. He had spent so long fighting to survive, running from the shadows of his past. But now? This was his choice. He looked at them, three powerful, extraordinary women who had challenged him, broken him down, and rebuilt him stronger. And somehow, they wanted him. A slow smile spread across his lips. He reached out, gripping their hands in his own. I accept. The elder raised his staff. A surge of energy filled the air as a golden light wrapped around them, sealing the bond. A new future had begun. Epilogue, a new life. Weeks had passed since the ceremony. Dorian sat on the balcony of the palace, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. The cool night breeze carried the distant sound of laughter from the training grounds below. A pair of arms wrapped around his shoulders from behind. You look like you're thinking too hard again. Naira. Of course, she always caught him off guard. He chuckled, leaning back against her warmth. Just taking it all in. Kylena stepped beside them, arms crossed. We have a council meeting tomorrow. Don't embarrass us, human. Dorian smirked. When have I ever embarrassed you? Naira and Kylena exchanged a look. Vela arrived last, placing a gentle kiss against his temple. You'll do fine, she murmured. Dorian exhaled, his heart full. He had come to this planet as an outsider. A stranger. Now, he was home. End.